Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to quickly get started with React Query. And in this video we're going to be using an existing React project that you can grab from the description below. And you'll notice that it's a very small project that has just two components, one app component and one characters component that uses a fetch API inside of it. What we're essentially doing is we're grabbing the Harry Potter API and just listing out the characters that we get back from it. So you might be used to useEffect and using the fetch API, but I want to show you how to quickly refactor this code and use React Query instead. So you have a lot of things built into this library that you'd have to manually build out, like the isLoading and so forth. So we have our React app running right here, and we can refresh, show that it's loading when it's fetching the data and gives us all this data. So let's go to the network tab and show you how the data is coming in. Right now, all we're doing is calling the characters, and we get a list of an array of objects that are characters. And we're just grabbing the character name and listing it and mapping through this array in our characters component. So let me walk you through this useEffect and how we're displaying the UI. And then let's start talking about how to implement React Query. So right now we have two useState hooks going on. We have isLoading and characters. isLoading is a Boolean and characters is an array. And I'm also using TypeScript. You don't need to use TypeScript to understand how React Query works, but in the case you do, it's just making sure that all of our objects are being typed out. And then this is the most important part. We have this useEffect hook, and what's happening here is on the initial render for this component, we run this function. So this function says essentially set isLoading to true, and then we're going to fetch our endpoint, which is this Harry Potter API that we're using. And I'll also link this down in the description. And what we're doing is we're grabbing the data and setting the characters from this useState hook to what we get back from the data. And then we're setting isLoading to false. In case there's an error, we're setting isLoading to false, and we're just going to console log out the error. Now let's talk about the UI. UI is if loading is true, we're going to have this isLoading div, and then otherwise we're going to check if characters has length, meaning it's not an empty array, and then we're going to return this map of the characters array, and we're just going to map through the names and list them out like we do right here. So this is a pretty straightforward use case of using the fetch API. And then in the app component, we just have characters. We're calling characters, and then we have this title and then an app. So this is how we have our initial app set up. So let's add React Query. So let's go to Quick Start. And I just want to get the installation, the yarn add React Query. Let's open up our terminal and just paste that in. And let's press yarn start, or let's run yarn start again. And let's go to our quick start. Cool. So what we're going to do now is wrap our app in the query client provider and give it a client of this new query client object that we're creating. So essentially, we're just going to copy this, throw that into our app, and we only need these two things, query client and query client provider. So let's create our query client right now. Perfect. And let's create our providers. So we have query client provider. And let's make sure this is below the div. And this needs a client prop, and we're going to do query client. Perfect. And now we're going to be able to use our hooks wherever we want. So let's go to our characters characters component, and let's actually just disable all of this useEffect real quick. And we should be just getting nothing. Perfect. All right, we should be getting isLoading false to start. There we go. it should just not show up at all. Perfect. Uh, Perfect. All right, there we go. So now let's start to use the useQuery hook. And we're going to do useQuery right here. So we're going to call useQuery down here. We're going to call it, we're going to actually const this out, query, and do use query from React query. So what we're going to do first is name our state object. So let's just call this characters. And then we're going to need our function that uses the fetch API. So let's go in here, and there's a really cool list of examples. So let's just go to simple. Wait for this guy, and then we'll see we have this simple API being fetched. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We have this fetch API being called, and we're going to grab the endpoint right here. And then we're going to .then it, grab it as a response in JSON format. Oops. Perfect. And now let's console log out query and see what we get. Perfect, right here. So we have our query, and you'll see that we have the data coming in, which is our list of characters. And then we have is error, is idle, is fetching, is loading, and a bunch of these variables that we can use to update our UI, which is really cool. So it essentially replaces this. What we can do now is destructure out data and is loading. Perfect. And we can get rid of that. And we can comment out this is loading. And we can even call data characters. Like so. And let's comment out this UC as well. And now we have a data has an any type. So this we just need to cast as I character. Perfect. Okay. Let's go ahead and refresh this. And you should see it work. So we're still making the same call. We're still calling the API, and we're still getting all of our names. But instead of this whole complicated use effect thing, we're just calling this this useQuery command. And we can get rid of our local state management as well, because the useQuery is handling all of that. So what we can do now is make this even cleaner and create our custom hook. And let's just call it use characters. So let's call it use characters. Oops. And what we're going to do here is grab everything that's related to creating or fetching the data and leave our component to just display the data. So we can just grab this. Oops. Before we grab that, let's create a hook. And in here, we are going to grab this and throw it in here. So we're going to want to import useQuery, and we're going to want to move this endpoint in here as well. And what we're going to be doing essentially is just returning our characters and is loading. And if there's an error, we'd want to throw an error too. So let's do that as well. But we're not going to be like rendering out the error or anything in this tutorial. So we have our custom hook right here. And what we can do now is even go here, and instead of using useQuery, we can do is const out use characters. And in here we are grabbing is loading and characters. And there you go. So you do not need to use any React's built-in hooks anymore, and we still have this working. and is loading is not defined. Oh, should be working now. Perfect. Awesome. So what we can do now to really make sure this is set up properly, and this is just a bonus, instead of casting out the types here or asserting the types here, what we can do is in useQuery, and this is just a TypeScript bonus type of thing, we want to assert the types of our data here. So we can do iCharacter and an array. And that's what we're going to be doing. And in here, we do possibly undefined. Okay, so let's do this. Perfect. So while data is fetching, we want to have this is loading and then making sure that the characters are there. We want to make sure we have a list of characters and map them out. This assures the type. And so you don't have to really make this typing process here messy. And we can get rid of this and clean this up. So there you have it. That's how you use React Query to fetch data from an API. Now, if you want me to create an entire series on React Query, on using everything from useQuery to use mutation and doing a lot more advanced things with this library, please comment down below and we'll make sure to make that happen. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.